Welcome to Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Bobby Pominville, and I'm your reporter on the arts. And I try to delve into all the arts in the area. And today I'm just delighted to welcome an author. His name is Dan Woll, and he is formerly a superintendent from St. Croix Central. Some of you will recognize that name. And we're going to really get into a novel that he wrote with a friend. And I do want to ask him first to tell us about his background and what led him into the writing of a book with his friend. So let's start with that, Dan.
Okay, thanks for having me here, Bobby.
You're welcome.
I'm real familiar with Hudson. It's a great town, and I have a lot of friends here, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you.
I've always been an educator, and a lot of my life is informed by my experience with children. I went to the University of Wisconsin, 1966 to 1970. I was a French major, and so job prospects for French majors in 1970 weren't the best, but the American Teacher Corps was looking for brave souls and warm bodies, and I signed up. I had been a lifeguard, so I knew I could work with kids.
Good.
I was sent to Wilmington, Delaware, an inner city school, one of the most valuable experiences of my life. Spent 2 years there as a middle school teacher, learned a lot, and I realized that education was an art, and I had a lot of getting better to do. I had learned some things. And at that point, I missed Wisconsin. Although I'm an East Coast kid, I had fallen in love with Wisconsin when I came out. So I applied. Sauk Prairie, which is Sauk City and Prairie du Sac, were kind enough to give me an interview. And I had 11 of the best years of my life in that school district. And I worked through teacher to teaching principal in a little tiny school with 150 kids. And we still have reunions, those kids and I. And then a building principal. Then I made the jump. I've always been a little bit of a risk taker. I made the jump to the superintendency. Barneveld, Wisconsin. My wife and I and baby girl got there in time for the Barneveld tornado of 1984. And my school was leveled. 10 people were killed, my athletic director, a student. And I really was sink or swim as a superintendent because I found myself in the middle of a school and community in crisis. Everywhere I have gone, I think I've made life friends. I stayed there 4 years. The town got back on its feet, and I wanted a larger system. And then basically the keystone of my career is St. Croix Central. I did some interim superintending for a year or two after that, but 21 years at St. Croix Central, and it's my roots. And if anyone is watching from St. Croix Central, great memories of a great school district. And I had a lot of interactions at that time with the schools in the surrounding area.
Right, so you're very familiar with Hudson,
the last thing I would
River
say
Falls,
is, having been all over the country and the state, this part of Wisconsin is a great K-12 system, really does.
Yes.
All these schools around here are great.
I tend to think that.
So that's my professional background. Yeah.
Very good. And that sort of laid some roots for that book, didn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Just to talk about writing a little bit, I'd always liked writing, and in 1983, when I was a principal at Grand Avenue in the Sauk Prairie School District, I thought I'd write a newsletter home to the parents. So I wrote this on mimeograph, or whatever this was called back then.
Yeah, I remember that.
Well, my superintendent, God bless him, was kind enough to send it to State Superintendent Bert Grover.
Right.
And he sent me a note and said, keep it up, young man, your community will like that. So from that day till the day I retired, I wrote a weekly column to inform the community, and I realized I liked to write. And I worked through every little kind of writing you can have, weekly papers. I wrote for the State Lions Club, and I wrote about a young man in Hudson. One of my breakthroughs was I started to write for this glossy, not a lot, but it's Velo News,
Yeah.
And I wrote some end pieces, and I also did some interviews. The first interview I did was with Bjorn Silander, who's a professional cyclist, and he went to
Yes.
Hudson High, and he's a
I do
Hudson
know
kid.
him.
So I have that connection. My writing kind of grew. It felt a little bit self-serving, and I wanted to try and write something a little more meaningful. So I wrote about the tornado. When I went through the tornado, I'd kept a diary.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So this is from 1984, and handwritten, and often tears and coffee and maybe a beer or two spilled on it every night I came home and wrote about what had happened. I wrote a 5,000-word article that the Cap Times picked up a year ago today, and it ran on the front page. It's the power of writing. That story still follows me around as survivors from the tornado come across it on the internet. And just to validate that, Bobby, this is a current edition of the National Superintendent's Magazine. This is April 2012.
Oh my goodness,
And
it's
so-
just out.
Yeah, it's just out, and they reran the story, a condensed version. So that's the power of writing.
That's amazing.
This is sort of my apprenticeship. As a subtext, my best friend and I had been writing a novel, and we can talk about that or not. But
Yes.
this is sort of this is the development of writing. Michael Perry, who's from New Auburn and now I think Fall Creek, Fall River, but great Wisconsin author. Our local library had him, and he told me, Dan, writing's like it's work, and the way I get attention as a writer is the way I get attention shoveling manure on the farm. I make a big pile. And I always treasure that piece of advice from Mike Perry. What he was saying via joke was, you have to write a lot. And so no job was too small for me or not important enough for me. And everything I wrote, I loved, from Bjorn Silander to the tornado to the newsletter. This was the apprenticeship. Meanwhile, my best friend John Lyon and I had been working on a book.
Right. Right, and that, I can't believe it, 20 years?
20 years.
I mean, that is so amazing, because I think about all the times you read it over and over and how you continually were improving or tweaking it in some way, and then it came to the final product, and it actually got published.
It had a lot of starts and stops. The way it began in the 80s, I took a canoe trip to a lake, a real lake in Canada called Cache Lake, Death on Cache Lake, and it was a lake like no other I've ever seen.
Yep, that's the title.
I had been reading a lot of fiction around the wild, James Dickey, Deliverance, things like that, and I got back and I was inspired to write a little 20-page vignette about a drama on Cache Lake. I sent that to John Lyon. By this time, we had met in Sauk Prairie. I had come up here. He stayed there. The internet was invented, thank goodness.
Oh, yeah. So you...
About a year later, he mailed me back this.
Really?
A novel. And in the middle was my vignette, and he had wrapped it in a novel.
Really?
I said, John, I didn't know you could write. I knew he liked to read. He was a passionate reader. We would trade mysteries back and forth. But unlike me, who did a lot of writing on the side, I'd never seen him write. Well, it turned out he could write pretty well. And there was a lot we liked in there, but the plot was cliche and hackneyed. And we talked about it, and we said, shake, it's a deal. This was this book here says 54,000 words, copyright, 1988. We actually copyrighted it.
Oh,
so
okay.
That's when we started working on it, and we worked on it until the millennium. It was about as good as we could get it, and it wasn't good enough. The plot device was sort of this drug smuggling.
Right.
Been done before, a lot better, and we don't know anything about criminal enterprise or big. We were over our heads in deep water. We put it aside, and I went to a reunion with some friends. We're all Madison grads, and we got talking about the 60s and how things happened, and I realized we had been struggling to make up this mystery And there was a real one in Wisconsin that's never been touched, and it's the Sterling Hall bombing. And one of the people who was involved in that has never been caught and is still on the FBI's most wanted list. And someone's going to tell the story sooner or later. John and I said, let's work that into
Yes.
our novel. It's not going to be about the bombing, but it's about the relationship between the two characters. But that's our plot device. And we got going, and we worked and finished it last fall. And then we may want to talk about this. John passed away as we got toward the end of this. Yeah.
How tragic.
Yeah,
So you lost your friend
I did.
in that wonderful collaboration. So what inspired you then to go on?
We each helped each other finish it up. My trepidation was writing is, no offense to you musicians,
No,
writing
heavens,
takes a
don't-
little more courage, I think, than
Oh,
other
wow.
arts because the art is not implied. And dance, sculpture, fine music, even vocals,
Yes.
it's passionate, it's engaging, but it's implied. In writing, there's nothing implied. You just put yourself right out there for God and everyone in black and white 12-point font.
Oh, I think that takes really a lot of talent.
And I'll be blunt. This is rollicking, tragic, profane. I think it's meaningful. It's not for everybody. My dad was going to read this book, and John's part of the final lap was, Dan, we're friends. We've worked on this our whole life. We're going to do this. And my part is, John was not passive, but he was not a pushy man. He was a helper. And he wanted to do it, but he was never the guy who was going to close the gap. So a lot of the book comes out of Hudson, Wisconsin, because John said, Dan, I'll help you stiffen your backbone to put this out for everybody, but you've got to do all this administration. And I knew people like Jeff Redmond, who has a law office here on 2nd Street, Redmond Law.
Oh, yeah.
And there were some legal issues, and so I handled that for John. And then you had mentioned this in your email. The publishing came out of Hudson too. Steve Delmon, who has Romay Publishing, I handled that. And
I didn't recognize that name, so that is Hudson-based.
Sure.
Wonderful.
So that was kind of our collaboration.
Well, that's just, what a story. And I mean, to think that you actually took one piece and said, that's not good enough, let's find something better. And then you really used the true name of that suspect, didn't you?
We did.
Which is Leo Burt, which I hadn't remembered. And you put that into your novel, and then somehow you wound it around not only Wisconsin, but something in Ontario.
Right.
How does that fit in?
Right. The decision to use an actual event with actual characters was a tough one because there was a tragedy and there was a person killed in this bombing, and we didn't want to make light of it. But, to me it seems like yesterday, but it's been 40 years.
I know.
And frankly,
Amazing.
and this is where John said, Dan, it's all right. Look what Stephen King just did, because what Stephen King has just done is published a book about what motivated Lee Harvey Oswald, and this 11-2363, I might not have that title right, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And he brings Lee Harvey Oswald in as a character via fiction. We're bringing the Sterling Hall mystery in via fiction. And this is a fascinating story, and it's going to be done by somebody someday. I have one director who's looking at it right now. I haven't heard back, so it's a long way from here to a screenplay. But we're kind of fascinated by history, and why go afar for a mystery or a plot when it's part of Wisconsin? And there are some factual pieces of that bombing that inform this. They were the bombers were stopped at Devil's Lake after the bombing that very night, and for various
Are you talking
reasons.
North Dakota now or Wisconsin?
No, Wisconsin.
Okay, because there's one in North Dakota too.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that. But then
let
how did
go.
they get to Ontario?
Well, the last place that Leo Burt was seen was Petersburg, Canada.
Really?
And you can run this plot through the little towns of Wisconsin, which John and I know. We're not making anything up here.
Oh, yeah.
And through the
First-hand
wilds of
knowledge.
Ontario, which I know because when I was younger and better health, did a lot of canoeing. And so we were really talking about locales we loved, and we talked about a friendship, because at the core, this is I guess you'd call it a buddy book now, but it's about a relationship. What I tell people, the older I get, the more I remember quotes, and this has been running through my head for a year. Bernard Malamud, the author, said, "Life's a tragedy filled with joy." And that's the sense of this book. Both John and I have lived that in various experiences the past 2 years. Or another way to put it, Winston Churchill, if you're going through hell, keep going. That's what the protagonists here, Caleb
Those
and
are
John.
great quotes.
That's what Caleb and John do. They keep going.
Okay, so that's your two main characters. then.
Yes, yeah.
And are they actually looking for this person? Is that what they're doing?
I don't want to give away the plot,
Well, you
because I'm
can't
hoping
tell
to entice
me
someone
that.
into reading it, but they
Okay,
intersect.
but somehow they're involved in this.
You know, I don't believe in coincidences, Bobby, and I think strange things happen in this world that you don't expect, and you've probably had that experience where you pick up the phone and you know who it is before you hear their voice, or you're running to someone in an airport. And the idea that maybe two people who went to the University of Wisconsin in the 60s and knew Leo Burt, and I vaguely knew him because I was a swimmer and he was on the crew team,
Really?
could run into a person like that escaping in Ontario by accident, as they were canoeing one way and they were re-entering the border illegally another way. That kind of thing actually happens. So this was sort of the plot device there.
That's very interesting. Can you tell me how old he would be today, Leo Burt?
Oh, he'd be about my age. He'd be 62, 63.
Oh, okay, because you in school the same time you were.
He was. And the university athletic department was such at the same time. And I talked to a few of the crew members who were his teammates, and nobody will give me an answer for sure. They all say it's possible. But there was only really one weight room for the entire athletic program, and the football people used it, and the swimmers used it, and the crew people used it. So I was in there, and I kind of remember him. He's a very intense individual, very intense person.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And no one else has really written about this?
After the fact, there's a magazine that's still going. It's very liberal, probably one notch on the spectrum past liberal, Mother Jones, but it's a respected magazine out of San Francisco. Somebody mailed me this after the book came out. They read the book off of Amazon. Mother Jones, in 1979, really dug into whatever happened to Leo Burt and alleged a conspiracy. Well, the conspiracy they allege is the one we invented, so that's pretty odd.
Really?
Yeah. And you could go back and Google Mother Jones. I think it's May 1979 and Leo Burt. You'll come up with the article. But they did some very heavy investigative reporting, and I think it's fair to say that they at least alleged the strong possibility that there was a conspiracy in this bombing that was much wider than anyone suspected. I'm not going to comment on that. They wrote the article.
Well,
what I will say is the plot that we invented independently is the same thing that they're alleging.
Well, that's too big of a coincidence. It seems like it's kind of a far reach, but maybe not so far.
Yeah.
But then one person being implicated, So there may be more to the story.
Well, there were 4.
Oh, there were 4.
And 3 were either apprehended or turned themselves in. One has passed away now of natural causes. The other 2 are still alive. I don't mention those 3. I just mention the one who is whereabouts unknown.
Oh, that's a wonderful premise.
So
I love the idea of, you know, trying to figure out that mystery.
well, and then, you know, while that mystery was going on, we had the mystery of what was wrong with John, because as we closed in on the finish line of this book, I just knew he wasn't right. He had developed the shakes, and he was tiring easily, and my wife's a nurse practitioner, not in men's health, but she said, you better talk to John. Friends had called me up, and the last time I saw John was at Dunn Brothers over here in Hudson.
Wow.
And we had met with our publisher and our editor, and we had okayed the final draft, and I walked him back out to the truck, and he was going to drive home. And I said to him, we had this kind of relationship. I said, John, I'm going to need you. Now, don't go dying on me. I didn't know. I didn't know.
And it wasn't long after?
Bobby, I'm never going to forget being in subway on the north end of River Falls on this very gray, depressing, cold, damp afternoon that only Wisconsin can give you. And my other friend who goes back to the 70s with John and I, Tom Conway, called up and he said, you're not going to believe this. I still don't believe it. But you know, another quote for you, Jim Harrison, the author, when I interviewed with the Wisconsin State Journal, I don't want to take credit for inventing this or stealing this quote, but Doug Moe reminded me of this quote when I was talking about John and me and my relationship. He said, Jim Harrison said, "Death steals all but our stories." And I promised John that death would not steal our story. We had addressed that obliquely if something would happen to us, and we had agreed that we were going to carry on. So I'm left, and whoops, I'm sorry.
So you did it, and it's quite a tribute to your friend.
Yeah, he was a good man. He was the kind of guy, you know, I do all the readings now because I'm the only one, but if John were alive, it would be me. But he'd be the first guy in the library. He'd be the guy helping the librarian put out the coffee. He was the kind of guy that if you went to a bar or a party and there was one of those old-fashioned popcorn makers, he'd find the oil and the salt. He was a small-town guy. And the parts of this book that are about the barber shops and the main streets and coffee clutches in Wisconsin, John lived that. I did too, but John was from McQuantico. John was a farm kid. He was a small-town guy. And so he
almost lived to see it published then.
He knew it was going to become a book. In fact, nobody has asked me about this, Bobby, but we each have a foreword. For whatever reason, I call my page acknowledgments. John calls his page dedication, but it's where we both thank those who supported us. Well, this was very much toward the end. This is after the meeting where John shook hands. He sent me this. It was awful, just awful. And every so often I'd be tough on John. And I said, John, you are such a good writer. What have you done here? And he was chagrined, and I don't know what was up, but a couple days later, he sent me this, and it was touching. And he did a great job of talking about people who were important to him, who inspired him. He died. I don't know if a murder mystery's ever been read at a funeral. I read this page in church at his funeral. It was as if he was speaking from the coffin to his friends. Only a week or two before he had written this. And, you know, I would like to acknowledge Denman Kramer, a World War II vet who built runways in the South Pacific and later became superintendent of the hydroelectric dam in Prairie du Sac. I asked him about finding dynamite attached to the one of the large transformers feeding the Badger Ordnance Area early in 1970. He said that's one night's sleep I'll never get back. You know, that's part of the story. So this Denman, who's in his 90s now, World War II vet, he not only got to see his name here, but that, John's family. And I love, you will like this. You will like this. For whatever reason, John's life toward the end was, John knew loneliness, and he lost his wife in a car crash, and he didn't have much family. His mom and dad were gone. He is close to his stepchildren, and Attorney Redmond and I have worked it out, so if the book makes any money, half goes to the kids. But
That's wonderful.
he adopted the Sauk Prairie Music Department, and they adopted him. Now, I can't explain that, but he loved music.
Wonderful.
So I'll read you this one little short paragraph.
Okay.
I want to thank the Sauk Prairie High School Music Department teachers, Karen and Sue, parents and students who allowed me to join them these past years. You have no idea how much you all have helped me. Interestingly enough, his church asked me for a case of these books.
Oh,
I said, do you realize that there are some vocabulary in here, romance scenes, and you're a church? They said, we don't care. It's for John. We're going to sell it, and we're going to donate the proceeds to the Sauk Prairie Music Department in his name.
oh my goodness. That's just a wonderful story.
Yeah,
Wonderful story.
that was the kind of guy John was.
Now tell me again, what was the name of the publishing company?
It's Romei Inc., Romei. And
Yeah,
we could talk
it's
about,
an odd spelling, I know that.
yeah, Steve Delmont is the contact point.
Okay, here it is. And then let's talk about where the book is available so our audience can search for it.
Sure. It's on the major markets, the giants, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kindle, and
Oh, yes.
obviously you can get it through those outlets. We have some smaller bookstores that are championing it, and I'm not saying because they're not, nobody's declined it. It's just we're just getting started with this. Valley Bookseller has some copies, but particularly I want to mention Chapter 2 books right here in Hudson.
Right on Main Street.
It's a little treasure.
Oh, wow.
You know, with all due respect to the Giants and to Valley, which is a great bookstore also.
Yes, yes.
Right here in this little town, there's an independent bookstore trying to take root, and
Nice.
call me old-fashioned, but I'm going to keep going there no matter what happens to this book, because I need to go in and talk to a literate owner who's got time to just sit and chat, whether it's the Hunger Games or Jim Harrison or whatever. And, oh, Dan, you know, there's a new Sanford book. I think maybe you'll want it.
Oh, yeah.
You've got a great little store here.
Wonderful.
So Chapter 2 books would be another place you can
And
get
I
it.
love that we're giving a plug for that bookstore.
And Valley Bookseller, if there were more in the Valley, but, you know, they're struggling. So,
Yeah.
you know, maybe folks should ask themselves, is it worth saving that buck, plus you got in and shipping, and do you want to lose an independent bookstore? It's, you know, it's the same with your bike shop here in town. Independent bike shops, bookstores, I hope we don't lose them in America. They bring something special. We don't want to become one big conglomerate.
Yeah, and that's one of my pet peeves is that we are losing a lot of that.
Yeah, yeah. And your libraries are, if you don't want to buy the book, but you'd like to read it, it's in the Moore system, which is basically the Indian Head system. And
Oh, okay.
I absolutely love the libraries up here. I've been reading, Norma Scott is the librarian in Somerset. She got 30 people out on a cold night to have a reading from the book, and Michelle Johnson in the Hammond Library. So, you know, if you want to read the book, but you don't want to buy it, you can go right to your computer and you can sign up for it, or you can go to, whether it's on the shelf in Hudson or whatnot, you can go to any library in this system and order it, and it'll come to you when it's your turn. There's, I believe, 6 libraries that are carrying copies right now. So little bookstores, little libraries, they're good things.
And you know, this is great because I hope there's some people out there listening that can maybe give you a call or email you and get you over there to promote it.
Yeah, and
Because you do a wonderful promotion for your book.
we were talking.
I've read parts of it.
We were talking before. We're both educators,
Yes.
and you don't become an educator unless you like people.
Yeah.
Being an administrator, I had parts that I didn't like and parts that I did like. This is kind of like I get to do all the good parts. So I really enjoy talking to groups. And, you know, I'm going to want to see 10 people or something. But,
Right.
you know, I went to Somerset, almost 30. I went to Hammond for whatever, 10 people. Doesn't make any difference to me. You know, I like talking to people. So, yeah, book clubs, libraries. John and I had talked about this, and this was our plan, that we'd push it for a year or so and see how it went.
Well, you've given us just enough information that we don't know the whole story, so we really have to pursue it now.
Oh, I hope that's true. And
That's what I would hope, that we encourage people to do that, and I know I'm encouraged myself. I haven't read the book, but I've got enough information that I'm interested now.
yeah, yeah, and you know, in the beginning with a book, you need to not think about making money with your art. You need to think about feedback and sharing it, and that's why I would emphasize the libraries too, because I think it's a strong book, and I think if people read it, work will get out there and things will take care of itself. So, you know, it's $15, and it may be older, someone on a fixed income. I remember that thing in Madison. I'd like to read it, but not 15. Go to your library and get it.
Yeah, there you go. And there's a way to contact you too.
You're on
the website.
I am on the website. You can type in danwoll.com. Also, well, I'm local. I'm in the phone book. But if you would be interested in having me come to a book club or a library, my email's a little complicated. It's lcapdan@yahoo.com.
Oh, yeah.
ELCAPDAN. El Cap is a mountain that changed my life. It's not an old boy moniker. lcapdan@yahoo.com.
Okay, appreciate that. Well, should we go into our philosophical question now?
Sure.
You ready?
Yeah.
What is the importance of reading in today's technological world?
I think reading is just the backbone of American independence. I think that it bonds families, it allows diversity. You know, I'm one of these guys, my wife and I, we have regular kids. We don't have super kids. I love them to death, and they're all doing well, but none of them are in the Olympics, and, well, neither am I. They're regular kids, and we're a regular family. And the thing that bonded us together so much, I think, is reading. And
Yes.
Beth and I read to these kids constantly when they were little, and they all still like to read. And I think if you want to start at the core, the importance of reading in today's technological society, if you have children, I think there's nothing you can do to bond a family together as much as read to children. And, you know, I did good things and I did bad things as a superintendent, but one of the great things I did do is, and you can ask people at St. Croix Central, I read to kids every single week. I went into a classroom and read to kids. Reading builds relationships. And, you know, at Hammond, we had just this very diverse group of people, and same at Somerset. And I could tell some of us probably politically wouldn't get along very well at all. Reading brings you together. It's so inclusive, it's so personal. Reading is tied to writing, the old-fashioned way.
Yes,
You can use a keyboard, but I'm not talking about texting and email. That just is too cheap, too fast, and it skips the work. So I think reading and writing are key. My reading director at Central, Shirley Arneson, said something that's very interesting about writing, because I think they're almost the same. as I was leaving, we were in-servicing teachers on writing to learn. And one of the things, it's impossible to let your mind wander if you're writing as you're listening and absorbing. So writing compels you to think, and I think email and texting doesn't count because it's just gone.
That's right.
So I don't know if I got quite at that, but my life would be diminished if I could not read. And you know, the relationship I have with my children, which I think is very strong, I think the backbone of that relationship is reading.
Yep, and I agree with you. I think it's so important today, and I think we really do a disservice if we're only doing the technological pieces, because we're not really teaching them a whole lot.
And you know what? Everybody likes to be read to. When I was at Somerset, and this is a bigger group, well, I said I read a lot. Well, I read to like second and third graders because at the core I'm an elementary guy.
Right.
So I have a lot of practice reading to people, but it's the way you read to third graders. And I asked Norma, the librarian, she said, no, just go read the way you're comfortable. So I got right in their face with the story, and it was just like reading to third graders.
And they
People
love it.
like a story, and so
That's right.
that's probably the most valuable thing you could take away from this interview if you're out there as a grandparent or young parent or friend of old people or a sick person. Reading is great. Reading
I think
bonds
so.
people together.
I do. I just really think it's so even more important in these days, because I know the technological thing is not really my thing. I mean, I use the computer a lot, and I like to sit down and do things, but I really like the hands-on approach. And I do think the more you read, the better you write. So for me, too, it's very important, and I have to say, I loved your answer.
Well, thanks. Thanks.
And I think we really interested people in what you've done here, and I think this is going to be a great success for you. And I'd like to you to keep in touch so I know what's going on with you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure coming here. I think the arts community in St. Croix County is second to none. There are just so many opportunities. And your show is, I'm honored to be here, so thank you.
Well, and I know the people all the way down 94 are really going to enjoy this.
Yeah, well.
And I just thank you so much for coming. You know, I heard about you through my husband, and it was just a wonderful lead for an interview. And I just hope that everybody enjoyed the interview today and will pursue reading this book and enjoy it as much as I will, because I'm going to go do it myself. So thank you for watching today.